So, welcome back to Diversity and Inclusion. We have another amazing show for everyone today. We're joined by Morgan Christie. She is an author, poet, playwright, and creative spirit. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Room, Aethlon, the Hawaii Review, Obra Artifact, Blackberry, Little Patuxent Review, Alternating Currents, as well as other publications. Morgan's off-Broadway play, When We Talk About Watermelons, won the 2017 Players Theater Prize during its run in New York. Her poetry chapbook, Variations on a Lobster's Tale, was the winner of the 2017 Alexander Posey Chapbook Prize by the University of Central Oklahoma Press 2018. And her second poetry chapbook, Sterling, was released in 2019 by CW Books. She's the winner of the 2018 Likely Read Fiction Chapbook Contest and has been nominated for Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net. Her first full-length short story collection, These Bodies, was published by Tolson Books in 2020. Her most recent poetry chapbook, When They Come, was released by Black Sunflowers Press in 2021 and is featured in the Ford Arts Foundation's National Poetry Day exhibit. Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you. It's so strange hearing all of that stuff kind of read back to you. We all know it's there, but it's just so strange. But thank you. Thank you. I'm really glad
Yeah.
to be here.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you. You've had a bit of an adventure, so we're glad that you're with us, and we're really really happy to talk with you. So just to begin, I'm just wondering, as far as your creative journey, I'm just wondering how that has informed your approach to writing and creativity.
Well, I mean, it's kind of been a staple in my life.
Hmm.
I mean, most of the time, I can't think of a time that writing or some sort of journey or affectation in regards to literature wasn't affecting my creative journey. And so I've found that not necessarily kind of defining yourself in one way as an artist or as a creative is probably the most freeing thing that we can do for ourselves.
Hmm.
And that process has really just helped me be able to kind of stream off into all of these different subsections that I've been able to.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I'm just wondering, what is your writing ritual? Like, what do you do? Do you have a certain time that you write? Do you need to, put on some incense? Maybe it's a little music. You know, what what do you like to do?
No, it's a good question, and
Uh,
I get it a lot. I find that just in general, writers get it
yeah.
a lot, and I think that there are people that are a lot more disciplined than me in regards to that. There was a point where I did say I was going to, write a certain amount every day, make sure that I was, pushing something out, but it just didn't really work with my writing style. I think
Okay.
it can really vary.
Mm.
I try to make sure that I'm at least composing enough so that I have something by the end of every year. My goal is by the end of every year to have something publishable, to have something that I can present and put out into the world. So that means throughout the year, I have to be producing enough. But I mean,
Hmm.
sometimes I might not write for a couple of weeks, and others I might have a dream sequence, honestly, and wake up from a dream
Interesting.
and just like pen a short piece, a long
Oh,
piece,
wow.
an essay that I'm interested in. So it varies, but I just make sure that I'm constantly producing.
That's interesting that you say sort of like a dream piece. So, are you able to transcribe everything as you see it in your dreams, or is there sort of like a differentiation in terms of what you see and how it's represented on the page?
I've literally transcribed things directly from a dream. I've only done
Really
this a few
interesting.
times. Only a few times, yeah. But
Interesting. Huh.
in the full length collection, I actually have a couple of pieces that stemmed that way. And I was just asleep and just and I started. There was this habit. It was actually an old professor of mine.
Hmm.
Cannot remember which one. That's horrible. But there was someone that basically said, always have a notebook next to your bed, though. Always try and sleep. I think it was Cheryl Monks. But yeah, she said always sleep with a notebook next to your bed because you don't know what's going to come to you. And normally a lot of our best stuff comes in that space. And so I've actually had full dream sequences where I just woke up immediately and wrote a story half asleep and woke up the next morning to a piece of fiction or some sort of poetry next to my bed that I did not even remember transcribing,
Wow.
but it existed there.
That's amazing that you're able to have such a direct like to your subconscious. But do you think that essentially that's what unfiltered art actually is? It's that link to the subconscious without any of that filtering or editing. You're
Oh,
able to kind
completely.
of manifest that and articulate that in a very, very direct way.
Oh, completely. I
Hmm.
think that ultimately that's art in its purest form because it
Hmm.
just comes from, yeah, it comes from the subconscious. It's something that connects to us and connects us to the outside world, but also connects with us so internally. I mean, I do think that some of the best art, admittedly, I mean,
Hmm.
I'm not going to sit here and act like editing or making sure that, we're creating art with a purpose or with
Hmm.
something to say. That's what I do. So I can't sit
Yes.
down and say that that doesn't exist as well. And
Hmm.
that's just as important to me. But I think art in its purest form just kind of comes to us, and it's just something that we sort of shed into the world, and sometimes those things are reflective of issues that are going on, sometimes they're not, but
Hmm.
ultimately I believe that is it at its purest. I believe that's it.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. So I'm just curious about your formation in terms of your creativity. So, what do you remember? Can you tell us a little bit more about the first piece you ever created?
Oh, like the first piece I had published or the first thing I've ever created?
Yeah, both. So the first thing you ever published and the first thing that you ever created as a creative piece.
Okay. The first creative piece that sticks out anyway. I've been writing for years, writing little stories as a kid, but
Hmm.
the first piece I remember writing and really feeling connected to, like this is something I think I might be able to present and do, was a poem in a creative writing course in high school, I believe. I think I was
Mm,
in high school, and
okay.
it was one of the first times that I had done something that felt representative of me,
Hmm.
specifically as a Black woman. It was something that was kind of touching on beauty norms and these sort of regimes in regards to these ideas. And I loved it. I really loved the piece, and I actually shared it with people, which was one of the first times I had done that. Well, outside of the workshop group, and yeah, and I felt connected to the work in that way, and to see the power that, I guess, the power that words and our prose could kind of hold, or our verse, whatever the case, and connect people to each other in this different way. So that was the first piece that I created that really made me feel that this is a journey I'm willing to take. The first published piece was actually creative nonfiction. It
Mm,
was a
interesting.
bit of a memoir piece, just on an altercation that had happened in my community at the time. And it was just this kind of, I was trying to create this mirrored idea of society, of our justice system,
Hmm.
of race relations, just all of these things that were happening right there in Toronto, because, that was something that I've always kind of just, I don't know, had a little disdain for in our
Hmm.
city and
Yeah.
even in our country. Just that this conversation is always created such distance, as if this sort of thing doesn't exist here, and we
Hmm.
all know that's not true. And so, well,
Definitely.
no, we didn't all know that's not true, and that was the point of creating that piece of prose. So even before I considered myself a kind of social justice advocate through my work, I was doing it without even realizing that I was. And so
Nice.
that kind of, reflects back to your other question on the importance of the edit, or how things actually, can be perceived when on the page.
Hmm. That's a very, very important point. So I'm wondering also too, just in terms of the way that you look at your work, I'm wondering how hard you are on yourself with regard to editing your work or filtering it, going through the different phases up until the point where it's actually uh, to the point where you can actually publish it.
Oh, extremely.
Yeah.
But I think that's the best medicine. That's just the way I was taught. It was the way I was raised. It was the way I was taught, just to be critical. And I think but that gives us the space to actually create things that are
Hmm.
publishable, right? If we can
Yes.
actually be hard on ourselves and do that. Admittedly, I will say, since kind of moving forward a bit in the career, and when you get to a point where you have an editor and you have a publicist, you kind of have people doing that for you a little bit.
Hmm.
So you almost don't have you. I mean, you still are just as hard on yourself, but it's nice having those other people there that can catch and can see what's going on and can kind of inform your stuff a little bit. And sometimes it can give you a little bit more room to just, keep creating and not spend a month on something that, you could probably spend half of the time on realistically, but some things just take more time too. So it all depends really.
Yeah, yeah. And with that said, I'm just wondering how you like to work with editors. Do you prefer somebody that's very, I guess, critical with your work, or do you prefer somebody that's more soft in terms of the way that they approach the criticism to your work and how you can improve upon it?
I've always, oh no, yeah, I've always preferred the critical. Whether it was
Okay.
workshopping as a kid, whether it was myself, now with my editors, it's just and it's not that you want someone to go and murder your writing. It's not that you're looking. I'm not. It's not about any kind of sadism. It's just it's really approaching a situation and having someone say, okay, this is great, but we're writers. It's like, we know, well, we try to present something that's great, right? Something that we
Yes.
like. We don't need to know, and it's not just writers in general, this is how people are, but we don't really need to know what gets a check mark. What gets a check mark will stay. And if something really works, of course, a compliment is nice, but the thing that we need, in my opinion, is we just need the criticism, because how are we going to grow? How are we going to polish? How are we going to hone this? And one of my experiences as of late, I guess, in working with so many outward people in regards to the process,
Yeah.
has been figuring out what works for you and what works commercially. It's a really tough step to have to take, because as an artist, I think you always want to be true to what you're creating. But I do think there's a point where you have to realize what the market is doing too, and how we can better push and make things appropriate. So that's kind of reflective right now in some of the essays that I've been working on and some of the nonfiction I've been kind of putting out there in articles. But yeah, it's a tough balance, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because my question that comes to my mind then is, how do you sort of thread that needle and walk that fine line between making art that you're proud of and is representative of where you are at this particular point, but also being cognizant of what's happening in the marketplace? How are you able to kind of walk that line?
Well, to be fair, having people help you walk that line is a big part of it, because
Hmm.
sometimes you just don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes you really just don't know. And that's what, teams are for, people that can do this research and let you know what's happening. But just being current, is just knowing what's happening in the world makes your writing so much more informed. It makes us more informed in
Definitely.
general.
Hmm.
So, being able to know what's happening, if you're responding to things that are very current and things that have been long-standing issues that have, not gone anywhere, those things make it, a lot more accessible. But in regards to, let's say, like, that's me talking about nonfiction or essays. But when I
Yes.
think about this, like, if you're referring to something more like fiction, or just like,
Hmm.
just kind of like what's happening with the novel, there are times where first person narratives are just hotter than, third person. And
Hmm.
I don't know, because I mean, I kind of pick up and read what I like to read, and I've always detested writing in the first person. So when you kind of have, an editor like, hey, produce something, from a first person perspective, because that's what's selling right now, it's good to know. It's good to have someone there to kind of nudge you in that direction, because I know I see it. But
Hmm.
if you kind of have your preferences, you just lean towards certain things sometimes, and you kind of just stay in your lane a little bit, and it's good for someone
Yes.
to be there to help, shove you
Yes.
out.
Exactly. And just speaking about that, growing and things of that nature, I'm just wondering how important mentorship is, not only to your life, but also to your creative practice.
Mm. I think it's extremely important.
Yeah.
And that's also if you're lucky enough to actually get one. I've discovered, and this is a really sad reality in regards to different mentorship programs and just actual structural and like just structural means of that idea. It's extremely hard to get mentorship that way, like whether it's
Yeah.
applications, whether you see like grant opportunities to have these things happen. It's hard. It's just
Hmm.
I think that there's a very niche group that often get kind of selected, and that's wonderful. But then there's a lot of people that are just kind of waving for help, because
Yes.
you're kind of in that in that middle ground of your career where you are, maybe you're kind of past emerging, but you're still at a point where you have a lot more room and a lot more space that you have to grow. So I think the importance is being able to kind of keep the relationships that you form with some of the people in your past, and I think inadvertently having them become mentors. There are old professors that I'm still in touch with, people I still talk to, share some of my writing with, that I can always go and talk to about the process. And
Hmm.
I don't think about them as like typical mentors, because they were literally professors, but then they kind of come into that role as our friendships build and we continue to grow. So
Hmm.
it's difficult though. It's a really tough space, and I know that as a writer, and I have other friends involved in other arts and like painters and musicians, and it's the
Hmm.
same thing. It's extremely difficult to find that sort of like formal mentor type of role.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, if you could change one thing about the creative process of your creative process, what would that one thing be, or what part of the creative process also do you enjoy the most?
Of my personal creative process, what would I change?
Yes.
This is a this is a bit of a catch 22, because
Okay.
part of it makes what I create as good as I like it to be,
Yeah.
but it's just the mental and emotional connection, I guess, to so much of the prose.
Yeah.
Like for instance, Sterling, the second poetry book I wrote, is basically a sort of love letter to this
Mm-hmm.
unborn child that I had.
Mm-hmm.
This kid that I'm afraid to bring into the world
Mm.
because of what's happening in the world.
Okay. Yeah.
And you write this, and I go to readings or I go to different events, and it's nearly a breakdown. It's like there are pieces of work that I can't read because there's just
Mm.
too much, there's too much candor. I leave a lot on the page, which I think we're supposed to do,
Yes.
but it is it's almost physically demanding. It's emotional tiring, it is mentally exhausting sometimes, and physically you read these things and you pour out. And that type of space, while I love it, and I don't think I could write any other way, especially regarding certain topics, but it's also something that is kind of it's really vulnerable. It just makes us really vulnerable, and it's really tiring, it's really exhausting. So in a way you almost want to keep the distance that you can
Mm-hmm.
have from that process, but
Mm-hmm.
it's the closeness, I think, that brings out most of the power in the writing that we see. Um, so yeah, so that's what I would change. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question was overall in terms of the creative process. What else? What part of the creative process you enjoy the most?
Oh, do you enjoy? Oh, the
Yes.
explorative nature. Just getting to explore and not having any type of box or bound to anything. You
Yes.
just get to create and do whatever you want to do with whatever you want to do. I just
Mhm.
don't think there's anything more amazing than that process. You can research what you want, you can write about what you want, you can talk about what you want, you can call attention to what you want to, and what's necessary. I'm not a ah, there are a lot of art for art's sake people in the world, and I think it's lovely. I do. I think it's really wonderful, but I think art with a purpose is just one of the most powerful things that we still have in existence today, in regards to creating social change, in regards to just personal affectation and moving people. It's a
Yes.
beautiful, beautiful process. So just being able to explore and just kind of do what you want to do with something, that's the best part.
I would definitely agree. And it's interesting because when you're talking sort of about that emotive process, I just remember reading your the short story 12 Steps, which is extremely masterful in your
Oh, thank
body of
you.
work. Yeah, it's fantastic. The struggle with addiction is so palpable. It's painful to actually read about the protagonist's struggle with that. And there's one portion that just really was devastating to me, and everybody that is listening and will watch this should definitely pick up these bodies because it's a fantastic body of work. But the one that really kind of stood out to me was, it was that point where the protagonist is trying to demonstrate that he has overcome his addiction, or he's attempting to overcome his addiction, and his daughter, unfortunately, Gemma, is sort of on the fence and kind of watching him to see if he's going to really come through. And this is the portion that really got to me. It's, I'm really proud of you. So this is her speaking. It'll be 2 weeks tomorrow. This is him. Don't answer. Just nod and keep your eyes on the television. She goes on to tell you to make sure to be home by 6 o'clock tomorrow. She's decided to make dinner to celebrate your accomplishment. Feel yourself tense as she takes hold of your chin, turns your face towards hers, and then says, "I love you, Dad." I was really just devastated when I read
Oh,
this. Yeah,
yeah,
because it's extremely, like, it cuts right to the bone, and it brings you right, not only in terms of his experience but also her experience. And I thought that was
yeah,
extremely powerful. So I was just wondering what went
yeah.
into, yeah, it's amazing, what went into creating this particular story, and this scene in particular.
Um, I I've constantly made a point to try and tell the stories that I feel are just untold.
Yeah.
Um, and this particular story of not only the protagonist Anuk dealing
I
with
look, yeah.
an addiction that
Mhm.
he had been struggling with, obviously, for a very long time, but also the effects of the other people involved. And I think that that's something that I felt very connected to, like stuff that myself, friends, and other people that I've grown up around, we see. It's stuff that we see and understand in the world around us, but no one is telling this narrative through the heartbreak, basically,
Mhm.
of the other people involved in the story. And so while this was the closest I came to doing a first person piece. It was second person,
Hmm.
but it's told through his perspective. It
Yes.
really is a story about her as well. And I love that
Hmm.
you talked about this and feel this pain, because it's Gemma's story as well. Yes, we
Hmm.
follow Anouk on his journey through these steps, but we're kind of understanding the breakdown of this particular character who is dealing with her own set of circumstances that are not good, just in regards to her father and possibly outside of that.
Hmm.
And I think it was, yeah, the idea for it was just to stem in telling the story of what addiction can do, not only to the people, obviously, that are
Hmm.
dealing with these things, but the people that are affected by them. And the fact that these things change all of us. It's not a unilateral issue when we talk about them in that way. So that was where the idea came from. It was really trying to call attention to all of the people involved in that sort of, addiction.
Yes, and I really like the part in terms of bringing those two narratives together because you can actually see sort of the domino effect that his addiction is actually having on her because she's having to spend time with a boyfriend that maybe not be might not be the best particular match for her, but she's in a position now where she's actually needing to reach out. But the sense of love and the sense of attachment that they both have, I think also
Mm.
heartens the story as well because when he goes to pick her up, she takes the keys away from him and ends up driving them home. So there isn't that sense of harsh judgment. There's a sense of underlying love, and I think that's also representative of people that go through addiction or see their loved ones go through addiction. Is that it's so much easier just to give up on that particular individual, but the fact is you don't. You want them to succeed and you want them to overcome whatever they're struggling with in order to move forward with their own lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's just a lovely way to not only tie in this particular story, but I think with most of them, ultimately the book is about relationships and it is about love. It's just
Mhm.
about different kinds of loves, all, all through, all through the spectrum in regards to all people. It's about what that actually looks like in different spaces that we might not be accustomed to, stories and spaces that are not often discussed, but it is. It's about love, and it's not so cut and dry. And of
Mhm.
course, this dynamic, there's all this conflict and all this anger and rage in
Yes.
this character we see in Gemma, but this is
Yes.
her father. It's the
Yes.
person that she obviously loves most, and
Yes.
it's not so easy to have to maneuver that. And so
Mhm.
again, trying to play on that idea and really touch on the tension. And yeah, I love that you saw and appreciated that sort of tension in the story, because it was one of my favorite pieces to write. It was one of the most interesting things I got to do with form,
Mhm.
with that particular piece. And so actually getting to play with structure and tell this sort of vignette, staple, or, these snapshots into this particular character's life was just, it was so great to get to explore. And then to get to do that with Gemma as well was, equally wonderful.
Yes, and I'm just wondering about the drafting process because one of the things that stood out to me about this particular piece, and actually it's my favorite story of yours in the book. It's fantastic. But I'm just wondering because it's a short story, but at the same time you feel like this character, these characters, right? So there's that sense of connection, and I'm just wondering how you're able to kind of put that type of emotion and that type of three-dimensional aspect to your characters inside such a sort of truncated space. And yet not make it feel like there's something missing about the story. Because sometimes when you read short stories, you have all these different questions and
Mm.
things aren't wrapped up as neatly as you want. But with this particular piece, and others obviously within your book, it feels complete. So was that a long process to go through in terms of drafting that, or was it an easy process?
Um, well, I mean, as far as the actual accumulation of the stories, I mean, I've started these stories about, I want to say 5, 6 years ago, before the actual publication. It was the first one was created. I think it was Stonefishing was the first one that I did, and it was something I did for a thesis project.
Hmm.
Then I was working on pacing. But it was, I think actually that one was one of the means of the beginnings to this care of characters.
Okay.
It was learning how to, for me anyway, it was learning how to slow the story down. I think that
Hmm.
characters drive a story for me. I know a lot of people say it's plot, with the setting. There are different writers kind of approach this in, obviously very different ways. But one of the things that again, I'm glad you saw,
Mhm.
my characterizations are so important to me. I want these people to breathe. I want them to
Yes.
feel alive. I want their loves and experiences and pains to feel real to us, because
Mhm.
I believe that that connects us to a story. I
Definitely.
believe that understanding that does that for more than anything. I think there's always a climax. We can talk about Freitag's pyramid and what's supposed to happen in a story. We can talk about the importance of setting in regards to certain environments, but
Mhm.
these characters, we just kind of have to live and breathe through them. And so even outside of just this particular writing, all of my stuff kind of does this. I'm so character based, and I try to
Mhm.
take a lot of time. And with 12 steps specifically, I do think that some of that has to go to the form. I
Yeah.
honestly really liked writing in the second person a lot more than I expected to. There's a real vulnerability to that form, where
Yeah.
you not only have a person speaking on the experiences that are happening, which kind of is resemblant of first, you're kind of bringing in this third person omniscient, where we have this person questioning themselves in such a natural way, because we're hearing about what they're putting through their mind as well as what they're observing and seeing. And it kind of happens really seamlessly with that particular
Mhm.
form. And people always say avoid the second person. People say avoid it, it's horrible, and it's tough. I do think it's a strange form to kind of play with. It can be really awkward, it can be clunky and a bit unnatural, but if everything kind of flows together, and I think you can find that proper vulnerability in the character that you're creating, I think it really does work in just kind of fleshing out who they are.
I definitely. I think it puts the reader just at the distance where you want them. I think, and you've done that
Mhm.
extremely well. So one of the other pieces too that I really enjoyed was Dry Dreams, because it
Mm.
it reminded me a lot of Fences in with respect to
Ah,
keeping people that
interesting.
yeah, because it reminded me of sort of that tenet of keeping those that we love at a distance, and I thought that was embedded in the narrative.
Mhm,
And I'm just curious about the way that, your main characters, Samaya and Raj, would
mhm.
describe their goals for their relationship before the dry dream, and then after Raj is able to help her reach the climax towards the end there.
Yeah, I think that was the problem, honestly, with the two characters in the beginning, is
Yeah.
that they really didn't have anything set. They didn't really have this conversation. They weren't open to any vulnerabilities, any concerns, or any worries. It just wasn't
Mhm.
discussed. And I think that that becomes, again, one of the issues. The central issue here is communication.
Yeah.
It's just communicating. These people are not talking. They're not
Mhm.
communicating. They're not talking about how they really feel and what's going on. Everything was kind of done in this very structural, kind of methodical way in regards to their relationship, how everything worked. And there was no release. There was no space for release. There was no room for that. And
Mhm.
in Samaya, you see someone that is obviously struggling, obviously dealing with all of these issues, that instead finds another outlet for
Yes.
that feeling. And Raj sees this, and instead of him communicating the issues and concerns that he has in a healthy way, of course, it just creates all this friction. And so I like that we were able to include a third character in the counseling idea. I kind of like that idea,
Yes.
but I did want it to go full circle by the end and have these two people just start talking. And I think that sometimes a third body is important to do that. But communication, honestly, is key. They weren't communicating even before they kind of confirmed who they were together. And I think that was the biggest problem. And it just kept carrying on into more and more.
Until yeah, it was more and more. Yeah, it's a very very fantastic story, and it's interesting because you touch on a very important point in terms of vulnerability, and I think not only in creative works but also just relating to people in general.
Mm.
The more vulnerable you are, the closer you can actually get to them, or feel connected to them. One of the interesting things too, in another piece in within your book, Sonic Boom, is the issue sort of like on identity and relationships. And I remember one particular memorable scene involves a young man from Spain and a woman named Marge, and the discussion centering around his background. And she kind of asks him, where you from? And he's like, oh, yeah, no, my family's from, somewhere in the United States. And she's like, no, 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 like, where are you really from? And it's interesting because, this whole issue of identity and what that means. So I'm just wondering, what is the sort of importance of identity within the context of your creativity and also within the context of your social activism?
Well, I mean, it ultimately makes up who we are.
Yeah.
And I think this idea of identity actually being individualized has gotten erased somewhere along the line. There's been a lot of generalizations. There's been a lot of construction of groups of people that are no longer individuals, but that are just a single, a single party or a single aspect of this larger function. And
Mm.
not that that's wrong. I'm not saying that if we choose not to join up with these sanctions and be a part of these communities, that's not wonderful. But identity is who we are. And
Definitely.
somewhere down the line, people just started deciding for us what identity was going to be. And depending on other people and their outlooks, that could really vary. Just like, yeah, with Marge in this scene, she wasn't asking him a question pertaining to what he actually felt about himself and who he was. And I've
Yes.
been in that boat before. I feel like a lot of people
Yeah,
have been
I've
in
been
that
that boat before as
before.
well.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so it's nothing we haven't heard, but it's again actually stopping to examine why this is something that's being done, how that same tension that you discussed before
Hmm.
actually makes people feel, and creating this idea
Hmm.
around what identity means to one person versus what identity actually is to the
Mm.
person involved. And I mean, then we can kind of go back into like Du Bois and this idea of double consciousness and how we perceive ourselves, how the world perceives us. But
Hmm.
it's just this idea of actually understanding what identity is. And I consider identity a very individual thing, and it's
Hmm.
not really looked at that way anymore. I think that it's just been grouped in with a lot of varying forces, which doesn't have to be bad if that's what people want, but
Yeah.
individuals make up their own identity, and I think we have to start trusting each other to be able to answer those questions and not just have our preset judgments in regards to what that means.
Definitely. And as you're talking, I'm actually thinking about Terrell Alvin McCraney and when he directed Cleopatra and Anthony. And when he
Mm,
did a talk back, because the way he
mm,
approached it was very, very unique. So he actually did it he cast an all black cast, African
mhm,
American, and he did it in Haitian Creole. And so people at the end were saying things like, "Oh, I didn't understand it. Like, why would you do that?" And things like that. But his comment, I think his choice basically was saying that, how do you think these people felt being transported from their land and brought into this new situation, this country where, they were subservient,
mhm.
they didn't know the language and things of that nature. So it's interesting that you sort of touch on identity because there's a sensitivity, I think, and an empathy that comes with recognizing each other's identity and being respectful of the way that we sort of interact with each other. And
Mhm.
so, with that said, I'm just wondering, in terms of your own creative practice, how important is empathy to you in terms of creating different pieces of your work?
Um, I'd like to say one of the biggest driving forces, and that's
Okay.
not even something that I can put to just writing and just the craft. That's just me. That's just me
Yeah.
as a human being. I
Yeah.
think, and it just comes across in the work. I hope it comes across
It
in the work.
does. Yeah, it does come across.
It's just, yeah, we just, yeah, well, thank you. But yeah, we just need to take the time to actually sit down and care enough about each other and each other's stories and what each other have to say. And I just think it would just, I know it sounds cheesy, but it would just make everything and make this world such a better
Better place.
place, because
Mhm.
it has been. It's just this lack of empathy has created such divisions and such resegregation in the world. It's always been that way. These issues
Mhm.
have always existed, but it's just become volatile. And the state of how things are, I honestly put it not only this lack of communication, but a lack of being able to empathize and to understand what someone else might be going through or what someone else might have gone through and who they are, how this makes them who they are. They just don't exist. Empathy is just, I feel like it's dulling in people, it's
Mhm.
just kind of leaving. And so if we can see that more in our prose, if we can, I want to believe that there's a hint of it in probably everything I write, because it's me. And so it just transcends onto the page. And I guess it's all that's some of my optimism. I am a pessimist at heart. I am definitely a pessimist. I honestly consider pessimism realism at this point, but that belief is definitely stemmed in a type of hope that I genuinely hope we can get back to as
Yeah.
as individuals, as people sharing this globe. I hope so one day.
Yeah, I hope so as well. So as my last question, I'm just wondering, so what impact ultimately do you want to have as a human being, as an activist, and also as a creative, as an artist?
Hopefully to continue to do what I've been doing and telling the stories that I believe are still not told enough,
Mm,
to tell them in ways that touch people, that resonate in some kind of construct that helps us to better understand. Because if there's some type of olive branch, if there's some sort of step taken, for some people, that can't be walking up to someone they don't know and asking a question or doing that. But maybe it's through fiction, maybe it's through prose, maybe it's through an essay, but something that connects people to the world around them in a way that they're unable to do without a sort of resource or a sort of stepladder to be able to find that space. It's just supporting just this growth as individuals and trying to reconnect everybody. It really is. I mean, it might sound a little sappy, but I think it's just genuinely how I'd like to want us to be and the way I want all of us to exist. And I mean, I get to a point where I know like my work is often discussed as like this pillar for like communities of color or for underrepresented people. And
mhm.
I'm in some ways I love that aspect. I love that that's a reality, but in others it's kind of still saddening that that's
Yeah.
all stuff that's still so real right now, and that there are still underrepresented writers and stories amidst this huge publishing market, amidst this world that's just garnered with nothing but information, to still hear things like someone striving for this sort of representation and serving the underserved. I love it, but and I really hate it too,
Hmm.
and if we can just start to bridge that and kind of create a normalcy in all things where things don't have to have that sort of division, even in our subset groups, whether we're talking about just regular work environments or whether we're talking about writing or just social interactions, just getting to a point where all situations, all stories are just on this equal playing ground the way that they are, even though there are a lot of people that still just don't want to accept or see that reality.
Hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. And we love to thank you so much for joining us. And we're looking forward to
Of
reading
course.
more of your work. You're fantastic. And everyone should go pick up your work and support you.
Well,
So
thank you. Oh,
thank you so
and I
much.
do have some news. Sorry,
Oh, please. Yeah, go ahead.
before you go, I know we are cutting short, but I do have some news. I just found out actually since we last spoke that these bodies actually got nominated for a Hurston Wright Legacy Award in fiction. And it was so
Congratulations.
exciting. Thank you. It was such an exciting experience. And
Oh my
so,
gosh.
like I said, I feel like I'm just this little fish amongst these behemoth authors in that list, but please go check out the Hurston Wright Foundation, what they're creating. Please check out Tolson Books, my publisher, who's been such a great means of support for this process. But also, it's just, I'm just so excited about that. And hopefully, it garners people just to want to pick it up even more and see what's going on. So thank you for having me. I'm
Our
so glad to
pleasure.
be here. This is so
Our
wonderful.
pleasure. Yeah, we expect more. We're definitely, this is only the beginning. We expect to see more from
Oh,
you.
I'd love to be back. Please, please.
Okay.
This is a great, great conversation. So much fun.
Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Okay,
All right.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.